have not spoken before do so. Secondly, I want all of you to speak. That's why you're here. And so, but I will make sure that you keep within your 3 minutes, please. Thank you, Sam. I think we have a quorum. We can start. No quorum yet? 1, 2. So we'll wait just a few more minutes, then we'll get started.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can go ahead and start if you want to. We just
Could
can't
we just
take
have that way? Okay.
We just can't take any actions until we have a quorum.
Okay.
Okay.
I forgot that. Okay, we now officially will open the October 26, 2017 Regional District Board meeting. If we will please have a call to order. So we'll start with you, Sam, please. You're here.
I'm here.
Okay. Mary?
Barely.
Bob Lutz, Health Officer.
Tony Smith, Administrator.
Karen Stratton, City of Spokane, and today I am the assistant to Mr. Chuck Hafner.
Okay. I'm Chuck Hafner, acting chair for today.
Susan Boyson, appointed member.
Michelle Fossum, legal counsel.
And Pittsnovel, recording secretary.
And again, I will just kind of want to appreciate you, all of you, to be here while you're here today. We as a board want to listen, and we do make sure that the minutes are read. But again here, if it's going to be a duplication of something that is being said, in order to take up time, perhaps you'd respect and do that for others to be able to speak. Otherwise...
Turn it on there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Or she's going to keep score. Now, I will probably botch up some of the names, and if I do, please let me know that. But again, we'll do our very best. So let's start with Luis Marquez. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. Close enough?
Where do I? Here?
Okay, right there. And please speak clearly in the mic.
Okay.
In order to, again, I will not interrupt you until your 3 minutes are up. If you haven't completed, at that time I'll tell you when your 3 minutes have you completed. Okay? Thank you.
Okay. My name is Luis Manriquez, and I'm a family physician here in Spokane. As doctors, we are expected to practice evidence-based medicine. We take the science, and it guides us to do the best thing for our patients. On vaccines, the science is clear. You are more likely to be seriously injured by a vaccine-preventable disease than you are to be injured by vaccination. That is why the Centers for Disease Control ranked immunization as one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, right alongside motor vehicle safety and smoking cessation. There is no reputable medical or public health organization that disagrees on the benefits of immunization. And as a father of 3.5-year-old twins, I am grateful that my children are safer due to vaccines. Though it strikes me today that the conversation is not really about vaccination, it's about parental choice. So let's talk about parental choice. A teacher who has children can decide to smoke at home and decide to smoke in front of their children if they choose. I hope that they don't, for the health of themselves and for their children, but they have that freedom. When they come to work, however, things are different. We would never allow a teacher to smoke in the classroom. Something is different about schools because we have to be concerned with the welfare of all the children. We have to think about the whole. Teachers can't smoke because smoke is harmful to children. The science is clear on this as well. Smoking in class would be a clear risk to kids and one that they couldn't avoid, and therefore we limit that teacher's freedom to protect the children, and at the same time, they are free to smoke at home. Sending unvaccinated children to school during an outbreak is a clear risk to that child. It's also a risk to all the children in that school and to everyone in the neighborhood when they come back home. Just like smoking, the risk of smoking is unavoidable for all the other children, so is it for unvaccinated kids. That is why we keep unvaccinated children home during an outbreak, for their own safety, and because in a school we have to think about everyone. We have to be concerned for the whole. I understand it's difficult for those parents, and I think it's important that schools work hard to help those students keep up with their education while they're at home. but it is not safe for them to be at school. It would be dangerous to change the rules around going to school during an outbreak if you're unvaccinated. Dangerous for that child, for the rest of the school, and for the community as a whole. As a father and as a medical professional, I ask you to do your part to maintain this rule to help protect our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia Stellmacher? Is that correct?
Stellmacher.
Stellmacher, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sylvia Stellmacher, and I'm a second-year medical student at the University of Washington School of Medicine here in Spokane. This last summer, I was able to work in West Africa at the regional infectious disease clinic, where day after day, minute after minute, we would get new patients who I would see. Often they would be children, writhing from tetanus, from meningitis, from diseases we could prevent with vaccines. Today, here, we don't see tetanus as much. We don't see meningitis, bacterial meningitis, as much. It seems far away, often something we think of in the past. But really, it's all around us. It's in the world, in countries that border us. But luckily, thanks to vaccines that we have here today, we have eradicated, or nearly eradicated, many of these diseases from our communities here. However, there's still a risk for these diseases to come out. I work today in the pediatric oncology unit at Sacred Heart Hospital, and these children cannot get vaccinated due to their immunocompromised status. They're receiving chemotherapy, so they can't get these vaccines because it could potentially exacerbate their underlying illness. However, they see friends, they see family members who interact with the school communities, and they're at risk if these members interact with other community members who are not vaccinated, who maybe acquired the illness and carried it along to those in the hospital who are most vulnerable to these outbreaks. So even though infectious disease may seem far away and distant to us now, since we've done such a great job of creating herd immunity, especially here in Spokane, it's really something that can come back at a moment's notice and can really affect those most vulnerable in our community. So I urge you all to consider those that are most at risk that you may not see here today, but that we have to be concerned about. And I hope you make the right choice in understanding that vaccines are important and that we ensure that children who are not vaccinated don't put others at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Stowe or Spell? Laura? Is that correct?
So my name is Courtney Roberts. I'm speaking on behalf of Laura. So hi everyone. My name is Courtney Roberts, and I'm a first-year medical student with the University of Washington School of Medicine. And I'm here to speak with you all today from a personal experience I've had. Past 2 years, I've had the pleasure of living and working in Mount Vernon, Washington, on the other side of the mountains. And I primarily worked with children. I was a substitute school teacher. And during this time, we actually had an outbreak of mumps in Mount Vernon. And I had thought that mumps had been eradicated. I was not aware that they could still be, that the disease could still come up. And so we were all very, very fortunate. We were very happy that the unvaccinated children that did not have the vaccine for the mumps stayed at home, because when in the hospital the mumps had come out, there had been children that had been in contact with the individual who had gotten mumps. And so luckily the unvaccinated children stayed at home, and the mumps have been contained. So I think it's very important that the children that are unvaccinated stay at home.
Okay, thank you. Nikki Leclair? Is that pronounced correctly? Nikki, Luckund?
I don't think she's here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Jacqueline Gallion, please.
Jacqueline Gallion, City of Spokane Valley. First, there has been a lot of inaccurate talk about how exempt students could somehow be a danger to the immune-compromised students. What pediatric oncologist or immunologist is telling parents that school is a safe place for their immune-compromised child? Here is a Johns Hopkins immune-compromised patient guide, which you guys all have in front of you. You guys all have a copy of this. It says that immune-compromised patients should not touch communicable surfaces, handrails, elevator buttons, etc. How safe could a school drinking fountain be? It recommends that immune-compromised patients wear an N-95 mask when in any public place to avoid a crowd, which it defines as people within arm's length. It directly warns us against being around recently vaccinated people. Do the schools currently notify immune-compromised patients when their classmates are recently vaccinated? Here's a medication guide for immune-suppressed drug Stelara. This guide warns against being exposed to the recently vaccinated. Last is a copy of the Washington Department of Health list over 60 notifiable health conditions, and most are contagious and very few are even theoretically vaccine preventable. On this list to notify conditions is vaccinia transmission, which is a person becoming infected by contact to someone who has a recent smallpox vaccination, normally being military personnel. And the Washington Department of Health recognizes vaccination-caused contagious infections to be a real event. Considering the widespread risk of an immune-compromised student would be exposed to in the uncontrolled environment of a school, regardless of other students' vaccination status, it is responsible to have them enrolled. Is it responsible to have them enrolled while they are not healthy? Next, recall at the September meeting when board member Josh Kearns asked for clarification about whether the Mumps exclusions were mandatory. I could not tell if Dr. Lutz's answers was serious or sarcastic. And please notice that your legal counsel declined to speak with Dr. Lutz after he asked for help. I have Director Smith's admission and 2 lawyers confirm that the exclusions were not mandatory. The check box on the form is only an acknowledgement of notification. It does not constitute an agreement. Exclusion is a restriction of movement that falls within quarantine statute, which has due process protections for citizens' liberty interests. A parent is not forfeiting the due process rights by checking the box, and we should have been pleading our case in hearings, not in board meetings. If your attorney has a viable legal argument contradicting this, it should be shared. Otherwise, all evidence points that Spokane Regional Health District improperly denied several hundred Spokane students their access to their protected education for 25 to 90 days. With all the harm it's been risked. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
I do want to announce also that we've had numerous and many emails regarding this situation, and there have been handouts this morning. We will diligently look through those and read those so that we make you know you understand that we'll read all the material that has been sent to us. Okay? All right. Now, Ed Pace, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ed Pace. I live in the city of Spokane Valley, and I serve on the city council. Am I close enough to this mic? Cool. So I'm speaking in support of parental rights on behalf of my constituents, some of whom are here. On Tuesday, August 29th, I placed a proposed parental rights ordinance on the Spokane Valley City Council's advance agenda with the support of 2 other council members, Caleb Collier and Mike Munch. It reads, within the city limits of the city of Spokane Valley, no government entity, agency, or municipal corporation may usurp or undermine parents' authority over and responsibility for their children. So as a parent of 4 and a grandparent of 6, to me, it's shameful that parents have to ask for permission not to vaccinate their children. It is shameful that parents can't decide whether or not to send their healthy children to school during a disease outbreak. It is shameful that a teenage girl under the care of her parents can obtain medical procedures without her parents' knowledge. And it is shameful that parents can't censor information given to their children at public school. So why is this city council's business? We city council members take an oath of office in which we promise to uphold and defend the U.S. and Washington state constitutions. The Washington State Constitution says in Article 1, Section 1, that governments are established to, quote, protect and maintain individual rights. We're a government. Where do parental rights come from? Nature, for one. Children grow inside their mothers for 9 months. Then they are nurtured and educated by their parents. Comes from God. The Bible makes it very clear that parents, not governments, are in charge of their children. And where are parental rights supported other than city councils? Court cases. Meyer versus Nebraska 262 U.S. 390 in 1923 held that parents have a fundamental right to raise their children in the manner that they see fit. Prince versus Massachusetts 321 U.S. 158 in 1944 held that the care, custody, and nurture of the child must first reside with the parents. So what am I asking for here? I'm asking for a collaborative search for a win-win solution to parental rights in the form of a series of conferences held jointly by the Health District, Central Valley School District, and the City of Spokane Valley, where participants would include...
Thank you, Ed. Just like the City Council Valley, 3 minutes are up.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kaylin Bonner, please.
Kaylani Bonner, Spokane Valley. I'm honored to be here today to share excerpts from a letter that was delivered to the Secretary of Health and Human Services on October 12, 2017, outlining serious and most certainly egregious violations of duty and lawful order to both ensure and improve vaccine safety. I trust that you will consider this well-referenced information with an open mind in light of a common hope we have for the health of our children. Those who delay vaccinations, selectively vaccinate, or opt out altogether have one thing in common. They have valid concerns about vaccine safety. We who are demanding policy reform are not asking for vaccine use to end. We are asking for the known flaws, risks, and limitations of each vaccine be respected, just as they are with most other pharmaceutical products, and that policies respect those limitations and risks. This letter begins, Dear Secretary Hargan. But it's not just to Secretary Hargan in Washington, D.C. This letter is to Dr. Lutz, the acting health officer on this board. This letter is to concerned mothers from the Indivisible group. This letter is directly applicable to each person in this room because we all want protection and health for our children and our families. Dear Secretary Hargan, Informed Consent Action Network hereby provides notice. This can be found on ICanDecide.com for those in the room that would look this up. Hereby provides notice. Americans, including over 55 organizations listed within, whose members exceed 5 million Americans, are concerned about vaccine safety. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 made nearly every aspect of vaccine safety the exclusive responsibility of the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. As a Secretary of HHS, this means that you shoulder virtually all responsibility for assuring the safety of vaccines administered to America's 78 million children. This notice respectfully requests confirmation that certain obligations regarding vaccine safety required under the 1986 Act have been fulfilled or will forthwith be fulfilled. We would welcome the opportunity to meet and discuss reasonable means for complying with these requests. If that is not possible, the 1986 Act authorizes a civil action against a secretary where there is alleged a failure of the secretary to perform any act or duty. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer Burrows.
Jennifer Burrows, City of Spokane. The 1986 Act granted economic immunity to pharmaceutical companies for injuries caused by vaccines. It eliminated the market force which drives safety. Recognizing this unprecedented elimination, the 1986 Act makes HHS directly responsible for virtually every aspect of vaccine safety. The number of required vaccines has grown rapidly since 1986. The deficiencies at the HHS start at the beginning with pre-licensing safety. Drugs licensed by the FDA undergo long-term double-blind pre-licensure clinical trials, during which the rate of adverse reactions in the group receiving the drug under review is compared to the rate of adverse reactions in a group receiving an inert placebo, such as a sugar pill or a saline injection. Even with these long-term studies, drugs are still often recalled. In contrast, vaccines are not required to undergo the same quality of testing. In fact, not a single one of the clinical trials for vaccines given to babies and toddlers had a control group receiving an inert placebo. Most pediatric vaccines currently on the market have been approved based on studies with inadequate follow-up periods of only a few days or weeks. The only standalone polio vaccine was licensed after a mere 48-hour follow-up period. Such flawed and unscientific study designs cannot establish the actual safety profile of any vaccine. The 1986 Act expressly requires that you as a secretary shall make or assure improvements in the licensing and research on vaccines in order to reduce the risks of adverse reactions to vaccines. The next step after licensing would be to capture adverse events in the real world. The 1986 Act established the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, or VAERS, operated by HHS to do this very thing. In 2016, VAERS received over 59,000 reports of adverse events. A Harvard Medical School study funded by HHS tracked VAERS reports over a 3-year period at the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and found that fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported. In 2007, an agency within HHS sought to create a system that would automatically report adverse events to avoid this issue of underreporting. After 3 years and $1 million in taxpayer dollars, the CDC refused to communicate with the Harvard Medical School HHS grant recipients to take the final steps of linking VAERS with the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare system so as to finalize the trial. Capturing fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events 30 years after the 1986 Act is not acceptable. The 1986 Act expressly provides that you as a secretary shall make or assure improvements in adverse reaction reporting in order to reduce the risks of adverse reactions to vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it Artie or Andy Frosted? Okay, thank you.
Ann Frosted, Spokane. I was asked to share our experience with the vaccine, and compared to other experiences, ours seems
Could you
mild.
speak a little louder, please, so
Okay.
that we may all hear? Thank you.
Start over.
Okay.
I was asked to share our experience with the vaccine, and compared to others' experiences, ours seems relatively mild. We were fortunate. We're part of that 99% of those who were just formerly just heard about not being reported for vaccine injury. At the age of 4, our oldest son, who was perfectly healthy and very athletic, had an alarming reaction following a vaccine. For several days, he was not able to walk, doing a commando crawl to get around. When he started to walk, he had weak and wobbly legs, as he called them. He developed an odd linear rash, crested rash beginning at the site of the injection on his buttock and about 3 inches in length. After a couple of weeks, he could run, but not like he could before the vaccine, a resulting gait disturbance that did slowly improve over the next 2 years. And during this time period, he would complain, "My legs do not do what I want them to do. My legs won't keep up with my arms. Why won't my legs run?" While his gait recovered, it took almost 2 years. He still has some health issues that we believe resulted from the insult to his neuromotor system. And the points we wish to discuss today is that we learned from this experience is that 1, there's no antidote for a vaccine reaction. Nothing. Nothing can reverse what has occurred from the vaccine. And it's pretty alarming when you find that out as a parent. 2, there's no system in place to guide a parent, patient, or physician in treating a vaccine adverse event, let alone recognizing the injury, which I'd love to go into. While there's a benefit to vaccines, we truly do not know the risk versus benefit without an active vaccine adverse event reporting system, which brings me to 3. Our son's injury reaction was significant, was not reported properly. Later learning that VAERS existed and knowing that our son's reaction was not reported has given us cause for great concern. According to the CDC, our son's injury never happened. Why did our son have this injury? Did he have a form of Guillain-Barré, provocation polio, a bad vaccine lot, underlying susceptibility? It was simply chalked up as a mystery in that he looked okay now. We do not know. We now question how policy can be made without this information. Does the board keep an active, detailed statistics on local reports of adverse reactions to vaccines? We could not find them on the Health District website, but we did see the message in the comparison to being struck by lightning and that disease is only a plane ride away. In creating policy, does the board take into consideration families like ours who had a child struck by lightning, or that the reporting system for reactions appears to be treated with less importance than efforts to identify those who are not vaccinated? All we know is that because of this experience, we are in a minority of unknown number. The choices we have made put us in an even smaller minority. Up until this point, this has not been a problem because others are not aware of our experience. However, by speaking today, I have crossed a line that has not only put me in an even smaller minority of people publicly sharing an adverse reaction experience, but significantly changes the way I'm viewed by the community. Do you now consider me an anti-vaxxer, a danger to the community, a problem, an unfit mother, selfish? The labels themselves are symptoms of an unwillingness to be bothered by information that does not fit within our paradigms. Science, by definition, is never settled.
Thank you.
One reason. Okay.
Chris Eifert?
Actually said my name right.
Oh, good. Thank you.
In 1995, I contracted the polio virus. I woke with a fever and flu-like symptoms. By dinner time that day, I was taken to the ER, and by morning was transferred to a children's hospital. In that 24-hour time frame, my neck, left arm, and right leg was paralyzed. I was 3 years old. Every mother's nightmare. After many weeks of quarantine, because it was contagious, I began a long road of therapy. I eventually regained my neck strength and use of my right leg. My left arm never fully recovered. On April 12, 1955, the polio vaccine was declared safe, effective, and potent after the largest clinical trial ever conducted on 2 million children. That was when the vaccine became part of a concentrated effort to reach all children. School-aged children were luckier because they were able to get their vaccines at school, while others stayed at home waiting their turn, as I did as a preschooler. I became infected 4 months after the program started, while my mother waited for our vaccine. Polio survivor children did not want to be left behind. We wanted to run, skip, and ride a bike like everyone else. We just had to try harder to keep up. Some kids wore leg braces and some limped. But our try harder mentality carried us into adult life where we tended to overdo. Unbeknown to any medical professionals that would come back to haunt us. Then came the diagnosis of PPS, post-polio syndrome, increased muscular weakness, neuromuscular pain, and fatigue, even affecting those who had no initial paralysis. It is a progressive disease, so the wheelchairs, crutches, and braces that we once left behind in our youth will return as we age. The younger you were at the time, the more post-polio syndrome will affect you because of life-increased activity. It began appearing 15 to 30 years after the initial attack at ages 35 to 60. I was diagnosed with post-polio syndrome in 1997. You see, it wasn't over as we thought. It's a disease of a lifetime. If you or anyone you know is experiencing these late effects of polio and have questions, you can please contact me. Young mothers today have never seen the crippling fear of a polio outbreak. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Helm, please.
Hello, Kim Helm, Spokane Valley. So I'm continuing on with where Jennifer left off with this letter to the HHS. What needs to be done next is assessing which vaccines cause which injuries. In 1991, the Institute of Medicine, or IOM, examined 22 commonly reported serious injuries following the DTP vaccine. The IOM concluded the scientific literature supported a causal relationship between the DTP vaccine and 6 of these injuries: acute encephalopathy, chronic arthritis, acute arthritis, shock, an unusual shock-like state, anaphylaxis, and protracted inconsolable crying. The IOM, however, found the scientific literature was insufficient to conclude whether or not the DTP vaccine can cause 12 other serious injuries. The IOM lamented that it encountered many gaps and limitations in knowledge bearing directly and indirectly on the safety of vaccines and on the poor design of the few existing studies. It therefore cautioned that if research capacity and accomplishment in this field are not improved, future reviews of vaccine safety will be similarly handicapped. In 1994, the IOM issued another report which examined the scientific literature for evidence that could either prove or disprove a causal link between 54 common reported serious injuries in vaccines for diphtheria, tetanus, measles, mumps, polio, hepatitis B, and Hib. This report again stated the lack of adequate data regarding many of the adverse events under study was of major concern to the committee. Presentations at public meetings indicated that many parents and physicians share this concern. In 2011, more than 15 years after the IOM reports, HHS paid the IOM to conduct another assessment. This third IOM report reviewed the available science in regards to the 158 most common vaccine injuries claimed for varicella, hepatitis B, tetanus, measles, mumps, and rubella. The IOM located science which convincingly supports a causal relationship with 14 of these injuries, as well as acceptance of causal relationships with 4 additional serious injuries. However, found the scientific literature was insufficient to conclude whether or not those vaccines caused 135 other serious injuries. With this also comes identifying which children are susceptible to vaccine injury. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Christina Nielsen.
Hi, Dr. Christina Nielsen. I'm a physician here in Spokane City. The Institute of Medicine has consistently acknowledged there's individual susceptibility to serious vaccine injuries. The IOM acknowledged research suggests that most individuals who experience an adverse reaction to vaccines have a pre-existing susceptibility. These predispositions can exist for a number of reasons: genetic variants, environmental exposures, behaviors, intervening illness, or developmental stage, to name just a few. Some of these adverse reactions are specific to the particular vaccine, while others may not be. Some of these predispositions may be detectable prior to the administration of vaccine, but much work remains to be done to elucidate and to develop strategies to document the immunologic mechanisms that lead to adverse effects in individual patients. The 1986 Act expressly provides that you, as a secretary, shall promote the development of childhood vaccines that result in fewer and less adverse reactions, and shall make or assure improvements in the labeling, warning, and research on vaccines in order to reduce the risk of adverse reactions to vaccines. Next, removing claim vaccines do not cause autism from the CDC website. This broad claim is plainly not supported by the scientific literature. As part of the IOM's 2011 review of vaccine safety, it was asked by HHS whether there is a causal relationship between autism and the DTaP vaccine administered to children at 2, 4, 6, and 15 months of age. The IOM could not locate a single study supporting that DTaP does not cause autism. The IOM therefore concluded the evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship. This finding is attached as Appendix B. In fact, the only study the IOM could locate regarding whether DTaP causes autism concluded there was an association between DTaP and autism. But ironically, this study was disregarded because it provided data from a passive surveillance system, VAERS, and lacked an unvaccinated comparison population. No research has been published since 2011 that could change the IOM's conclusion. Based on the foregoing, the CDC cannot validly make the blanket assertion that there is no causal relationship between vaccines and autism. There are also no published studies showing that autism is not caused by hepatitis B, rotavirus, Hib, pneumococcal, inactivated poliovirus, influenza, varicella, or hepatitis A vaccines, all of which HHS recommends babies receive, typically multiple times, by 1 year of age. As for the MMR vaccine, the CDC's own senior scientist, Dr. William Thompson, recently provided a statement through his attorney that the CDC omitted statistically significant information showing an association between the MMR vaccine and autism in the first and only MMR autism study ever conducted by the CDC with American children. Dr. Thompson, in a recorded phone call, stated, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe we did what we did, but we did. I have great shame now when I meet families with kids with autism because
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, it's over.
Oh my gosh.
Carol Trask, is that right, Carol?
Yes.
Okay. I would ask if you recommend or suggest you speak clearly into the microphone so that you can be recorded correctly, so that when we do the minutes, you'll have that information, okay?
Okay, I'll try.
Okay.
Carol Trask, Spokane Valley. So to continue on, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did what we did, but we did. I have great shame now when I meet families with kids with autism because I have been part of the problem. The CDC is so paralyzed right now by anything related to autism. They're not doing what they should be doing because they're afraid to look for things that might be associated. Hence, as for the only vaccine, MMR, actually studied by the CDC with regard to autism, it appears the CDC may have concealed an association between that vaccine and autism. When the former director of the National Institute of Health, Dr. Benedine Healy, was asked about whether public health authorities are correct to claim that vaccines do not cause autism, she answered, "You can't say that." The more you delve into it, if you look at the basic science, if you look at the research that's been done in animals, if you look at some of these individual cases, and if you look at the evidence that there is no link, what I come away with is the question has not been answered. The 1986 Act expressly provides that you, as a secretary, are to develop vaccine information materials for distribution by healthcare providers to the legal representatives of any child or any other individual receiving a vaccine. The information in such materials shall be based on available data and information and shall include 1, a concise description of the benefits of the vaccine, 2, a concise description of the risks associated with the vaccine, 3, a statement of the availability of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, and 4, other relevant information as may be determined by the Secretary. The VIS produced for every vaccine, including the DTaP, provides that other relevant information regarding the vaccine is available at the CDC website. The CDC website, in turn, claims that vaccines do not cause autism. Since HHS has chosen to incorporate the CDC's website into the VIS as a resource, then the information on that website must be based on available data and information. But based on available data and information, HHS cannot validly claim that vaccines do not cause autism. Next is a refusal to conduct vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. The only scientifically valid way to answer a large portion of the questions raised regarding vaccine safety would be a long-term, properly powered and controlled study comparing the rates of all adverse events between vaccinated children and completely...
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yvonne Frederick, please.
Hello, Yvonne Frederick. I temporarily live in Coeur d'Alene, but me and my husband own a business in Spokane Valley. The only scientifically valid way to answer a large portion of the questions raised regarding vaccine safety would be a long-term, properly powered and controlled study comparing the rate of all adverse events between vaccinated children and completely unvaccinated children. HHS has nonetheless refused to conduct any such study. The need for this study is highlighted by the results of a few recent limited vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. Dr. Peter Abbey is renowned for studying and promoting vaccines in Africa, with over 300 published studies. In 2001, he published a study finding children vaccinated with DTP were 10 times more likely to die in the first 6 months of life than the unvaccinated. Dr. Abbey's study therefore concluded, all currently available evidence suggests that DTP vaccine may kill more children from other causes than it saves, from diphtheria, tetanus, or pertussis. More disturbing is that children vaccinated with DTP were dying from causes never associated with this vaccine, such as respiratory infections, diarrhea, and malaria. This indicated that while DTP reduced the incidence of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, it increased susceptibility to other infections. A properly sized vaccinated versus unvaccinated study is necessary and possible. as stated by the IOM in 2013. It is possible to make this comparison through analysis of patient information contained in large databases such as VSD. Senior CDC scientist Dr. Thompson similarly stated in this type of study can and needs to be done, but that the CDC is not doing what they should be doing because they're afraid to look for things that might be associated. The 1986 Act expressly provides that you, as the Secretary, shall promote the development of childhood vaccines that result in fewer and less adverse reactions, and shall make or assure improvements in the labeling, warning, and research on vaccines in order to reduce the risks of adverse reactions to vaccines. Finally, we need to reduce conflicts of interest at HHS. The 1986 Act created a system in which vaccines are licensed, recommended, encouraged, subsidized, and defended by HHS. The 1986 Act scheme thus places HHS in charge of two competing duties. On one hand, HHS is responsible for vaccine safety. On the other hand, HHS is required to promote vaccine uptake and defend any claim that they may have caused, and defend against any claim that they may have caused. Regrettably, it appears that HHS has chosen to focus almost entirely on its vaccine promotion and defense function to such a degree that it has essentially abandoned its vaccine safety function. To restore balance, HHS...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron Crandler, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm just going to continue. With regards to the CDC's advisory committee, the immunization practices, which effectively decides whether the universally recommended pediatric vaccine, the committee forced the ACIP members routinely failed to disclose conflict with vaccine makers and conflicts to disclose to the CDC grants a blanket waiver to the members each year that allow them to deliberate on any such subject regarding to their conflicts. The HHS license effectively mandates and promotes a vaccine to millions of American children with very limited safety data. This is the very same government agency that is mandated to defend against any claims that vaccines cause harm. The VICP is effectively the only legal resource in America to obtain compensation for a pediatric vaccine injury. The injured must litigate against HHS and the DOJ in a quasi-judicial process filed under seal where the injured child effectively cannot obtain documents from or dispose vaccine makers to prove how the vaccine caused injury. Worst of all, the injured child must always prove causation regarding an injured child, proved that it adds insult to injury because the HHS conducted the vaccine safety science it demands as proof before licensing a vaccine. The child's injury may have been avoided altogether. This truly is an epitome of injustice. As confirmed by the IOM, HHS has conducted the basic science needed to even determine whether commonly claimed vaccine injuries are caused by vaccines. It has failed to conduct even one properly sized study comparing vaccinated to unvaccinated children. Many doctors and scientists, as well as politicians, are legitimately concerned about the process whereby vaccines are licensed, recommended, promoted, and defended by the same department. This is not because of any conspiracy. Rather, the system eliminates the incentive and a disincentive for the HHS vaccine makers to conduct research to uncover long-term chronic conditions which can result from the vaccine schedule, which is 56 injections, 73 doses, and 30 different vaccines. The 1986 Act expressly provides that you, as the Secretary, have at least equal and arguably greater responsibility for vaccine safety than for vaccine promotion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deb Harper, please. Okay.
Can you say the name one more time?
Deb Harper. Okay. Paula Smith.
Paula Smith, Green Acres, Washington.
So in conclusion, the HHS can do better. With hundreds of vaccines in the pipeline, it must do better. Children susceptible to vaccine injury are as deserving of protection as any other child. Every parent that does not witness their child suffer a serious reaction after vaccination is another parent that will not add their voice to the growing chorus of parents opposed to HHS's vaccine program due to safety concerns. We respectfully request your attention to the important concerns outlined above and hope you agree that addressing the concerns is in everyone's best interest. These, in fact, reflect nothing more than what Congress already explicitly recognized when passing the 1986 Act. Vaccines can and do cause serious injury, and HHS needs to work diligently to identify and reduce these harms. It is, however, our hope that the vaccine safety issues identified herein can be resolved cooperatively, with all interested parties working together towards the common goal of vaccine safety entrusted to HHS. Signed, Del Bigtree, Informed Consent Action Network. This is fantastic news that this notice was served. We know that everyone in this room does not want any harm to come of our children, whether that be from a disease that a vaccine could have prevented or an injury caused by a vaccine. We all want the same thing: happy, safe, and healthy children and community. This is a huge step that may just get the answers that parties on both sides of this issue need. Again, I want to encourage you to read the full notice and see the other facts that are given to back up the summary of how poorly HHS have stewarded their responsibilities. Parents like myself are so often told that we're making statements from junk science. See the footnotes on where this information is coming from. Places like straight from the CDC, FDA, Freedom of Information Act, HHS, you know, all the experts that we're so often told we should listen to. How dare we contradict their recommendations? They've gone to school for this. I mean, these are the people we should be listening to, right? Well, we are listening, and more people are listening. And until what Dell is requesting is done, or they show proof they've already done it, what the evidence is showing is the science is not yet settled in the case of vaccine safety. Let's pray that HHS will step up to their moral and ethical duty. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Standler.
My name is Kim Stadler, and I am from the Spokane Valley. In 2008, I was the mother of a healthy 8-year-old girl named Jerica. I was also pregnant with my son. Jerica received the MMR vaccine. She had no medical or neurological history prior to this vaccine. She was diagnosed with acute disseminated encephalitis and short brain swelling. This is a listed reaction to the MMR vaccine. I often wonder if proper testing had been done on vaccines and I had been informed of the risks if I would have made the choice to vaccinate her. Maybe my daughter could have spent the last 9 years outside of hospitals. Maybe I could have watched my daughter grow from a delightful child into a young woman. 2 weeks ago, while she was back in the hospital with complications, her high school hosted its annual homecoming dance. I wonder what kind of dress she would have picked out, what color, what style. The life my daughter was robbed of lingers in my mind, and I am haunted by it. I am still in touch with her childhood friend via Facebook. Her friend frequently posts pictures of her marching band performances. The girls used to talk about growing up and playing the flute together. Sometimes if I stare into those pictures long enough, I can almost see my daughter standing there, smiling with her best friend, flute in hand. But then the reality comes back. The world kept spinning for everyone else, and my daughter has been forgotten, suspended in time, unable to grow up. There are no homecomings and no marching bands. With Jerica's future gone, I am left with a 17-year-old daughter wearing diapers. Her IQ is 62 points. She no longer has friends or joy in her life. Her only wish is to die. If she were capable of formulating a plan to kill herself, she would. But she will get her wish. The brain swelling that occurred not days nor hours, but minutes after the MMR vaccine is a death sentence. Her brain is deteriorating at 5 IQ points a year. This will cause her death. We need our health district to recognize vaccine safety violations and shortcomings that have been presented today. I am asking that you advocate for a safer program. The little boy that I was pregnant with at the time of my daughter's injury is now 8 years old and understandably unvaccinated. I need the policies of this board to reflect the constitutional rights of my son and the rest of our children, the rights to education, privacy, and non-discrimination. We must work together to bring justice for children like mine, whose lives have been destroyed by vaccines. We want to save the immunocompromised children of this world, but we also need to prevent and save the Jericas of this world too. I am standing here today to honor my daughter Jerica, the life that was stolen from her, as well as the life that she suffers now. Watching your child slowly die is truly the worst nightmare a mother could ever face. Thank you.
Lilana Delora, is that correct? And Petra Hoy, together you're doing a?
We have 4 parts.
4 parts. Okay.
Hi, Petra Hoy, Spokane Valley, and I have a letter from Dr.
And who are you?
Oh, Petra Hoy.
Okay, thank you.
Can I move this closer? Is that better? And I am reading the first part of a letter from Dr. LaSalle. She's an MD at Rockwood. Dear Board, thank you for allowing me to address you today. I'm sorry that I could not be with you in person, but had a prior family commitment, and as you are here today to discuss, family is of the utmost importance. The health of our families, particularly our children, who so often do not have a voice in the healthcare decisions that were made for them by their parents, and the health of our communities are the reason that I went into medicine and is the reason why I'm writing you today. I have been a family physician for 16 years, caring for patients from birth to old age and during all stages of life in between. My passion in medicine is preventative care, helping to keep our people and communities healthy and to decrease the burden of illness and disease. There have been many successful public health initiatives over the years, but vaccines are by far and away the most effective form of preventative care that we have, and I wholeheartedly believe that vaccinating our children and ourselves is one of the easiest and safest things we can do to preserve our health and to limit the spread of diseases. It is therefore still amazing to me why we are still debating the benefit of vaccination. In my many discussions with patients about vaccination, I have come across a few common concerns. You may be hearing some of these at your meeting, and I would like to address them with you today. To start with, you should know that the large majority of medical providers support vaccination. And these are people with years and years of training, people who have access to the best of what the medical community has to offer, and we choose to vaccinate ourselves and our loved ones. This is not something we would do if we felt there were major safety or efficacy concerns with vaccines. That alone should tell you something. Vaccine science has been around for over 220 years. The first vaccine, created in 1796, was used to fight the scourge of smallpox. This infection killed millions of people and decimated empires, contributing to the fall of Rome, Aztec, and Incan empires. Thankfully, we no longer see this illness, and our children no longer need vaccination against smallpox because it was eradicated from the face of the planet after a concentrated vaccination effort by the World Health Organization. In more recent times, we saw the influenza pandemic of 1918, which affected 1/3 of the world's population and killed an estimated 50 million people, more than died in all of World War I. We have not seen a pandemic such as this since the influenza vaccine was introduced in 1933. Part 2.
And this is Leanna, is that correct? Lana? Lanai? I'll get it right for soon.
You haven't been to Hawaii, have you?
I have, but I didn't have to pronounce it.
It's
right?
Leilani DeLong.
Okay.
I am an RN. I graduated from nursing school in 1966, so I have seen a lot of changes in the last 51 years. I'm continuing to read this letter because I feel like it's important. Unfortunately, our collective memory is short. Those of us alive today have never seen a vaccine-preventable epidemic, and that is because of vaccines. But if we ask our grandparents, our great-grandparents, both of which I am, most everyone will have a story about a friend or family member lost to influenza or rubella or measles or polio. They would be astonished that people decline these life-saving interventions and would be ashamed of us for taking life and health so lightly. One common concern I hear is that vaccines aren't thoroughly tested and that their safety is not well established. On the contrary, vaccines undergo more rigorous testing than practically any other medical intervention out there. Vaccines are in development for typically 10 to 15 years before they are released to market, and the scrutiny does not stop there. After going to market, the drug companies continue post-market analysis, and the CDC and FDA jointly manage a program to try and identify any adverse events that may occur after a vaccination has begun widespread use. This program is called the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, and it collects reports from anyone, medical provider, patient, lawyer, etc., about bad outcomes from vaccines. The majority of side effects, swelling, pain, redness, etc., are underreported, and the majority of side effects considered more serious are rarely found to be related to vaccination. Each claim of serious adverse events is investigated. This is how it was discovered that the original rotavirus vaccine contributed to a greater number of cases of an intestinal condition called intussusception. That is why that product was removed from the market and a new, safer alternative is now available. We have a system of checks and balances, and the assertion that vaccines are not rigorously enough scrutinized is simply untrue. This is not to say that adverse events do not occur. Rare, serious side effects have occurred, but they are just that rare. One of the most feared is Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological condition that can result in paralysis. But the likelihood of this happening following vaccination for influenza, for example, is estimated to be only 1 to 2 in 1 million people vaccinated. The risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome is actually higher from getting the influenza infection itself. The reality is there is risk to almost everything we do in life. You could eat a cashew or a strawberry tomorrow and have an allergic reaction.
Thank you. Jeff Bullock, please.
I like being jovial. So, hello everyone. I'm Jeff Bullock, resident of Spokane Valley, and I just want to emphasize, having seen the vaccine numbers, it makes me so happy that so many children are vaccinated to know that the anti-side is very small. But in continuing with the importance of this letter, I will go ahead and be reading. So, people have also voiced concerns about the ingredients in vaccines and their reported relationships to everything from autism to infertility to autoimmune disease to cancer. The faulty research done by Dr. Andrew Wakefield suggesting that the MMR vaccine was related to autism was debunked and author stripped of his license for falsifying data. But somehow the assertion persists. In 2001, as a precautionary measure, and not because any reproducible evidence or harm, Thimerosal, an ethyl mercury containing preservatives to prevent fungal and bacterial infections of vaccines, was removed from all U.S. licensed vaccines except the multi-dose vial of influenza, which contains less than 0.01%. Thimerosal, a per-dose vial equivalent of eating 1 can of tuna fish, yet according to the CDC, the number of autisms have actually increased since then, not what you might expect. If there was a true relationship between them. Even Autism Speaks, the nation's leading advocacy groups for parents with autisms and their families, denies a relationship between autism and thimerosal content of vaccines, stating the results of this research are clear. Vaccines do not cause autism. Aluminum is an adjuvant used to boost the immune response to vaccines, so lesser quantity of vaccine is needed. Gives other causes for concerns, but this compound is plentiful in products we use every day: aluminum cans, tinfoil, deodorant, cereal, etc. Babies get approximately 4.4 milligrams of aluminum in the vaccines they receive in the first 6 months of life. Combined yet they get even more in their diet. 7 milligrams from breastfed infants, 38 milligrams in formula-fed infants, 117 milligrams in soy formula-fed infants. Aluminum is no more dangerous to our children than feeding them is. Again, there are multiple agencies, both private and government funded, that have actively monitored the safety of vaccines, and no relationship between autism, infertility, autoimmune disease, or cancers has been found. Another common misconception I hear is that vaccines are not effective. The argument being, if they are not 100% effective, why bother? But the same can be said of any intervention we make in medicine. Avoiding surgery, foods, eating lots of vegetables and fruits, and getting regular cardiovascular exercise does not guarantee that you won't develop diabetes. But we can do it anyways because we know it is good for us. Go.
Marianne Karcher.
Marianne Karchner, Green Acres, Washington. I am a nurse practitioner who spent many years in pediatrics, and more recently I work in the internal medicine field. I have done quite a bit of research into vaccines, and I'm just going to continue with Gretchen, Dr. LaSalle's letter, as I agree with it wholeheartedly. There is an assertion that pharmaceutical companies are just in it to make money, and therefore somehow this makes vaccines less reliable or safe. As we have already discussed, vaccine development and production are highly scrutinized both before and after vaccine comes to market. In fact, I found it concerning that there were claims that there are not adequate studies to show that vaccines are safe. And there are more studies studying the safety of vaccine than almost any sort of medical intervention. That's just blatantly false. Also, just because a study doesn't exist saying that if you have the DTaP, that there's no proof that then you don't get autism. You don't prove negative. We also don't do the study that if you eat oranges, that then you don't have autism. We can't prove every negative. That's not the way studies work. Anyhow, of course, pharmaceutical companies are in business to make money. All companies are in business to make money. Should we stop shopping at the grocery store? Should we stop going to the health club just because they are there to make money? No. Companies do need to make money. There is so much more to discuss regarding vaccines, but I know today's time is limited, and I want to end by addressing an issue before you, which is the main concern today is allowing non-vaccinating families to send their children to school during illness outbreaks. In my mind, we as a community have a responsibility to protect our children. Knowingly allowing unvaccinated children into an infectious environment where they can contract very serious and sometimes deadly diseases is unethical. It also allows them to then carry those vaccine-preventable illnesses out into the world, into the community, where they can more easily spread them to others. Herd immunity only works if high percentages of people are vaccinated. The reason we are seeing outbreaks of measles, mumps, and whooping cough is that fewer people are vaccinating. As a Board of Health, you have a fiscal responsibility to your constituents. The fact of this matter is that these vaccine-preventable illnesses are very expensive, both for families and the communities. The Journal of Primary Prevention estimated the economic burden of 4 major adult vaccine-preventable illnesses, influenza, pneumococcal, shingles, and whooping cough, in the U.S. in 2013 to be over $26.5 billion. Now throw into that vaccine-preventable diseases of children, and that number will be much higher. While I fully appreciate that parents want full autonomy over the health of their children, that doesn't mean that parents always make the correct decision. In this instance, the good of many needs to outweigh the perceived good of the few. Those of us in public health recognize how close we are to another epidemic outbreak. It is not a difficult step for us to take. We have seen us get very close to those epidemics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, but Roberts, I can't read the first name, please. Roberts, I heard the last name. Well, it looks like Jean Conbry. Okay, I can't read it, so no Roberts. Okay, Jerry Leclair, please.
My name is Jerry Leclair. I live in Spokane, Washington. I'm a retired physician of 28 years experience practicing in this community. I couldn't have imagined a few days ago that I would be standing here talking about vaccines. I'm old enough to remember the polio epidemic in the late part of in the 1950s, or at least the aftermath thereof, I received the Sabin and Salk vaccines, considered them a godsend, along with everyone else in the country who was receiving them, because I could see the folks who had suffered from the disease. I've personally experienced many of the now vaccine-preventable diseases. I've fortunately avoided the complications that I know are well seen in those diseases. It is clear to me that vaccination works. I think everyone ought to have their vaccinations. I'm up on mine. I do understand that when I have one, I don't like the concern that there's a small chance that I may have an adverse reaction to it, even a terribly severe one, as we've heard today. But I think for the good of the overall community, to scrap vaccination does not make any sense. People having freedom can choose not to have a vaccination, but I think the rest of us need to choose to have those folks who are not vaccinated not eligible to be in school when there is a communicable disease in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen? G? Or Gil?
Actually, Dr. Gill's not here, but I'm one of the partners. Is that okay?
Okay, that'll be correct. That's fine. And what is your name? Be sure you get your name, doctor.
Sure. My name is Dave, and my last name is Fregeau, F-R-E-G-E-A-U. I didn't realize that I would have dressed more appropriately. And I just want people to know my bias right off the bat. I'm an immunologist by training, and I'm also a pediatrician. So I clearly have strong beliefs in immunizations, but that's not really why I'm here to talk. Although I love what I've heard, some of it tragic, some of it informative. And I just hope that both sides can be, I love debate, and I love learning new stuff, and it'd be nice to be able to have discussions, really being respectful of one another. So I'm a little confused, and I might ask one question, because I thought that the issue at hand was whether children who are unvaccinated could be present in a school setting when there was an outbreak, when there was an epidemic. So I understand all the stuff about immunizations, but I really think that that discussion belongs way over here prior to when you're talking about or debating or having active disagreements about how do we prevent disease. And for me, obviously, I'm going to say I believe immunization is a good way to prevent disease, but we're not talking about that. So while I find it all interesting, and I really do, and I would like to learn more, to me, the issue is when somebody has an outbreak, when we've seen a bunch of them in the last 5 years, 6 years, should people who are unimmunized be there, be able to attend? And I would say no. I don't think that if I have somebody who is more susceptible, meaning an unimmunized person, not talking about whether somebody has a right or not right, parent makes that decision, I'm okay with that. But if you're now unimmunized, this is your bag. This is public health question. This is not me as a pediatrician. It's not even as parents. I mean, we have done this for years, or you guys have done this for years. Public health policy has said when we have contagion, that what you need to do is stop the spread of that contagion. And one of the things that we do is we try to decrease or hopefully eliminate the susceptibility or the hosts that are around to be able to contract that germ. So I don't really have much more to say to that other than this is always a tough, anytime you have a tough debate like this or a tough question, it always ends up being balancing rights, right? People have a right not to, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, they have a right not to immunize their children. They also have a right to feel strongly that their children should be able to attend school during an outbreak even when they're unimmunized. I happen to feel strongly on the other side. I respect their opinion not to immunize, but I also think that my right to have my child or my grandchildren not then be more exposed or have a higher chance of being exposed to a potentially serious disease, and in some cases I work as a hospitalist, so I take care of hospitalized kids, and I've certainly seen kids die from pertussis. So not to be dramatic, but not only that my kids have a right to not pick up a serious disease, but a disease that potentially could kill them. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you. Dan Mormon.
Hello, I'm Dan Mormon. I'm a pediatrician, so I'm a parent first, a pediatrician, a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and one of the Washington chapter representatives to the Vaccine Advisory Council for the state of Washington. So I'm speaking more on behalf of my own family and my own children today. And I was energized today when I learned there was a measure discussed or placed before the Spokane Valley City Council about parental rights and when we're excluding children from school. So lots of conversation about vaccines today, very appropriate to debate these things and talk about them. But my concern today was really working against or talking against our local health representatives or our epidemiologists not being the ones in charge of deciding who should be attending schools and when they need to be attending schools. So I work with several of our regional health officers and epidemiologists on the Vaccine Advisory Council and find their input incredibly important and incredibly insightful, and they don't take their job lightly. They look at the burden of disease, they look at the cost that families are going to incur when kids are excluded from school, whether it's lost education, lost wages, lost productivity. They take into account all of these things, and they have the expertise and the information coming to them through the different government agencies about what's going on in our communities, how fast it's spreading, and who is bearing the greatest burden of that disease. They have to make decisions about, is it unvaccinated children? Is it immunocompromised people? Is it even vaccinated children who need to be excluded? Who is the responsible agent for spreading this illness through a community? Is it a small pocket of the community? Is it a community group that we need to investigate more closely? So I am here today to advocate for the epidemiologists and the scientists who we have employed in our state to really help make that decision. And that's not always the information that's available to the public or the average parent who needs to make a choice about whether they send their school into that potential zone of illness. So that's where I'll leave it. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Chris Jackson?
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Jackson, and I'm a resident of Spokane Valley. I'm glad the marketplace of ideas is in full effect and force right now. That's one of the healthy parts of any good debate and free society is the ability to have these conversations. But to provide some context about an area that we've overlooked, we've kind of dried up the well on a lot of the vaccination issues. So most of that information's out there. Those arguments have been hashed and rehashed. But I was just at a high school civics group this morning at University High School, and one of the things that became surprisingly apparent to me is that one of the tenets of this resolution/ordinance that has been proposed is that children are sort of the property of their parents. And I don't use that language lightly because when we use the term property, that carries a certain amount of baggage with it. And I was having pretty exciting, vigorous, and lively debates with these students. These are pretty independent thinking students that are ready to sort of make decisions for themselves. And I realize that as a society, we don't really have a cutoff point for when adulthood starts and when you sort of break free of the ties of your parents and become your own person. And so as I look around the room, I'm also seeing a lot of older people that are making decisions on behalf of those affected parties. And so it forced me to think about more deep questions as if I had the choice of whether or not I would have been circumcised, would I have made that decision? Or if I had the choice over my immunization, would I have made that decision? And what I realize is that we trust parents as the stewards of fostering that relationship. And so I want to shy away from the word property because that implies that these aren't autonomous human beings that can make decisions that often conflict with what their parents put forward. And so moving forward with this discussion specifically, especially when it comes to whether or not they should be at the outbreaks, I think we should have kids presenting independent of their parents so we can get a decent perspective about what the younger community thinks about these decisions that are ultimately going to affect their lives. And until we hear that perspective, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek to say this is the right decision for a group that is the direct target of what we're talking about right now. And so I would like to find venues in the future to bring them into the fold because their opinion does matter, and I am curious to hear what they have to say about these decisions that we make often without their consent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Richard Chan, please. Is Deborah Chan going to speak on the same subject?
She has her own things to share. Thank you very much. My name is Richard Chan. I am a citizen of the Spokane Valley, and I just wanted to kind of change this perhaps point of view just a bit. Right now, we have a situation where the schools and the community have the responsibility to protect their charges, and because of that, they have a program to keep students out who are not immunized when then there's an outbreak. That is a good and proper approach. And if they don't do that, if that responsibility then becomes the responsibility of the individual sending the child, then who bears the legal responsibility if someone gets ill, polio, or some other equally horrible disease? Right now, if the schools do not properly support a student who has a peanut allergy, and the child gets ill or dies, who gets sued? So if we take away that responsibility, where then is the legal responsibility if there is an epidemic and unvaccinated children come to school and spread that epidemic? So consequently, as you can probably tell, I am on the side of maintaining the status quo, that the schools continue to do what they do, the health department continues to do what they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deborah? Deborah Chan, I'm sorry. Okay.
Hi, my name is Deborah Chan. I'm a citizen of Spokane Valley. I don't have a lot to say, but I consider this idea by the Spokane Valley Council to be a gross overreach of their responsibilities. This is a public health issue. This is not a city issue. This is a state and federal issue, not a city issue. They should be maintaining the streets and worrying about burglaries and taking care of our everyday needs, not inserting themselves into a public health issue like this where they have no responsibility to be. So, I feel that this is a public health issue, as in public, and Mr. Pace has said that he wants to watch out for his constituents. Well, the majority of the constituents vaccinate their children, and they want to send their children to school and have their children be safe in herd immunity. And so I feel that this whole thing has blown up into something that is ridiculous, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Warden, please.
Warden?
Warden.
My name is William Lamont Warden. I'm a retired family practitioner and emergency medicine doctor. And I can't believe what I've heard today. I'm in shock. I've never been to a meeting like this before, and I feel like I've been transported back to Salem whenever they were having those witch trials, and people actually believed that these young women were witches, and they were putting them on trial and killing them. That's pretty primitive, and we laugh about that today. From a medical scientific standpoint, that's the way I feel about a debate that attacks vaccines. Unbelievable to me. I'm also old enough to remember polio, and I was one of those first kids that got the vaccine in grade school. I remember the iron lungs. I'm also old enough that I did my training in the 1980s when Haemophilus influenza was a devastating bacterial infection. We were doing lumbar punctures and treating kids for meningitis all the time because that dang bacteria was so infectious. I remember chicken pox, and some people actually exposing their kids to other people with chicken pox so that they would get immunized to it. And then I looked up in the book and saw, geez, side effects of chicken pox includes encephalitis, includes orchitis and sterilization. There's a lot of serious side effects to these diseases. Maybe we shouldn't be exposing kids to those diseases on purpose. My heart aches for the mothers that shared testimonies about their adverse effects because of vaccines. That is so tragic, and I am so sorry for those mothers and those children. It's an unfortunate fact of life, as was mentioned in the letter by the other physician, that nothing is perfect. There's going to be side effects to anything. You might as well come up here and say, you know what? My wife was killed in a car accident because she couldn't get out of her seatbelt, and she died because of her seatbelt. Is that a reason to ban seatbelts? No, it's not. And the word community comes into mind. We are a community. We give up certain rights. When we go to the airport, we pass through a metal detector. We're allowed to be frisked and stuff because of the safety of the general public. We agree to give up certain freedoms because we care about the community as a whole. And I think that's the issue for the board. I don't think the board's here to decide about vaccines being bad and nobody should get them. Let people that don't want to be vaccinated not get vaccinated. That's your right. You have the right to make decisions even though the scientists may disagree with you. But don't force your opinions on the majority of us, on the community. Don't jeopardize the vast majority who are protected. Yesterday in the news, they announced that polio is only found in 2 countries. 12 cases of polio last year, thanks to Bill and Melinda Gates. We can eliminate that disease like we have smallpox and many others. Please don't jeopardize the community as a whole over the sad stories of a very, very vocal minority.
Thank you. Thank you. Colleen Temp? No, what is it? I'm sorry, I can't read. I'm not really good at cursive writing, so how do you spell that?
It's tariff, like terrific,
Okay.
without the ick.
Okay. Okay.
I'm Colleen Tariff. I'm a mother. I'm a pharmacist. I have my doctorate in pharmacy and my master's in public health and international medicine. I specialize in infectious disease and vaccinations. I'm going to pause for a minute because I added something. As a pharmacist, I do hear your concerns about safety for medications, testing methodology, conflicts of interest, disclosure, and bias. So I hear that and I appreciate that. I have worked over 20 years in an acute care setting with critically ill patients, and also in a clinic setting with immunocompromised patients. I'm a mother of a daughter who's an insulin-dependent diabetic who is considered at risk and was recently exposed to pertussis. As a parent, we're supposed to establish roots and wings for our children, impart wisdom, love, and protection, pass along traditions, values, beliefs, education, religion, while we balance that with independence and choice. We also need to protect our children and to also protect other children, vulnerable populations in our community. Parents, for most situations that they choose or decide for their child, rarely directly or even indirectly impacts my family or my children. But an unvaccinated child becomes an unvaccinated adult and could end up not only spreading infections like measles, whooping cough, and influenza and chickenpox, but can later develop complications such as meningitis, which I've seen, and sepsis, which I've helped treat, become sterile, develop liver disease or cancer. I challenge you to name an infection besides tetanus that's not contagious, person to person, that is in and protected by the vaccines. These viruses and bacteria are spread human to human, so this is about spread of contagious infections within our community, including our schools. And unvaccinated children can be vectors of spread. There are very few true contraindications to vaccine administration. And if a parent makes a choice not to vaccinate during an outbreak as an infection and a disease spreads throughout the community, my child and others can be impacted by that decision, putting my daughter, a diabetic, at risk of complications. Now, to be hopeful, we will have a generation of children who will ask, what is shingles? We will soon have a generation of both boys and girls that will have many fewer cancers related to HPV. This is amazing. I am hopeful we will consider the positive health impact and public health and safety of the community, including vulnerable, at-risk patient populations, balanced with science, solid, reputable science, sound rationale over individual, anecdotal, non-science-based testimony. Thank you.
I'll pronounce your name correctly next time. Nancy Babcock, I'm going to get Babcock, please.
Hi, well, I've been here a number of times, and normally I'm reading some prepared script, but I don't have one today. One thing that you probably don't know about me is that I have 2 grandkids that are unvaccinated. They both have medical exemptions. They are not able to have vaccines. They have been genetically tested, and we know one of them was vaccinated till he was 4, and we stopped. The other one, fortunately, has had none. We aren't concerned about them going to school at all. We're not concerned about other unvaccinated students. We're not concerned about getting on an airplane. We went to Mexico last year. We're going again in January. We aren't concerned because we try to properly take care of their health. We know what the risks are. We know when I was a kid, most of us in here of my age or anywhere near my age had chickenpox. It was never a concern until the vaccine came out, and all of a sudden this became a huge public health concern. Same with mumps. Mumps is a very minor illness that is generally gotten over quickly. And I would just say, if you go to a school, it's a petri dish of infectious who knows what. If you swab the drinking fountain or the desks, these kids are running around with all sorts of stuff. I'm on a plane every week, and I don't vaccinate myself. I'm not concerned about getting sick. If I get sick, I'll get over it. But we're exposed to germs, bacteria, diseases, infections, viruses, all day, all the time. You could swab your desks here and find who knows what kinds of things. And there are some people that are more vulnerable than others. Those people are going to be exposed to people in the grocery store. They're going to be exposed to people in the laundromat. They're going to be exposed to people in the library and many other places. The school is just one area. And if your kids are so immune compromised that they shouldn't be around other sick children, they probably shouldn't go to school. You could go to school any day and find kids who are sniffling and sneezing and coughing. Their kids put Tylenol in them, give them some cough medicine, and send them to school because they have to go to work. And these immune-compromised kids are around those kids all the time. But all of a sudden, it becomes this vaccine issue. If my grandkids are unvaccinated, and if my daughter is fine with sending them to school, then I think she should be responsible for that. If something happens to those kids, something horrible, my daughter should have to bear the responsibility of that, whether that's go to jail for murder or whatever it might be. She will have to take the responsibility for that. That's not a community decision. That is a parental decision, a parental right. So the pharmacist that spoke earlier said, what infectious diseases are there out there that there aren't vaccines for? There are many of them. We have many of them listed right here. So kids are going to school with some of these, some things we don't even know about, and they're going to school. The other thing about the mumps outbreak was not in unvaccinated populations. Thank you.
Okay. Phyllis Hess, please.
My name is Phyllis Hess. I live in Spokane Valley. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I, my 8 siblings, some 60-plus cousins, and our friends all got measles and rubella, and with these diseases came lifetime immunity. We all got mumps on both sides, and with it came lifetime immunity. We all got chickenpox, and with it came lifetime immunity. No one was sick for very long, no one died, and no one had lifelong disability from these diseases that I know of. I knew of no one in our school with ADHD, autism, diabetes, or cancer. Rick and I were married in 1972. We had 4 children in the 70s and 80s, and all were fully vaccinated by 1987. There were fewer vaccines back then. They were often sick with strep throat, tonsillitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia. Then I started hearing stories of sudden infant death syndrome occurring shortly after vaccinations, of children getting polio from the shots, and of an increase in autism. I read several books about vaccines and studied what I could from other books. There was no internet back then, so studying wasn't a trip to the computer, but a trip to the bookstore or the library. I read the vaccine inserts. When our younger children were born, we made an informed choice not to vaccinate. Our younger children were seldom sick. The younger 2 have not seen a doctor since they were a month old. They're healthy and strong. Our older children, the ones who were vaccinated, the oldest got measles at the age of 20 when she was studying midwifery and working with expectant moms. 3 of the 4 have autoimmune diseases. To my knowledge, I only met one someone who had had tetanus. He'd gotten it from the vaccine. If a child eats peanut butter and has a bad reaction, we're told he's allergic and to avoid future exposure. If a child eats tomatoes and everywhere that juice touched, the skin is red and rashy, we're told to avoid future exposure. If taking penicillin causes fever and itching, we're told to never again have penicillin. If the child gets stung and swells at the site, we say he's allergic and have him carry an EpiPen. If a child has a vaccine shot and swells at the site, gets a fever and a rash, we're told that's a natural reaction. Be sure and get the next shot on time. People who are health conscious are careful to avoid fish with mercury, but have no problem recommending the injection of children with vaccines containing mercury. We are warned about using aluminum cookware because of the danger of ingesting aluminum, but it's added to vaccines for injecting because it causes they add it because it causes toxins to remain in the body longer. Can you wonder that we hesitate to trust those who make these recommendations? Please support the parents' right to choose what is best for their children.
Thank you. Judy Arms? Armis?
Yes.
Is that correct? A-R-M-E-S?
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
My name is Judy Arms. I'm from Spokane Valley. I am just amazed listening to all of this, so I really appreciate everybody being here. My story's interesting, but perhaps not a big deal unless you look at the end of it. When I was 21 years old, I received a call that made the next 7 months of my life seem like forever. A friend called me to tell me that she had just come home from the pediatrician's office. Her child had come down with rubella, German measles, just days after our play date. Under normal circumstances, this might have seemed inconvenient. My 2-year-old had been vaccinated, but I had not. Also, I'd never had German measles as a child, and I was 6 weeks pregnant. This disease that's fairly mild for little kids is dangerous for pregnant women, and especially their unborn children. So upon the advice of my obstetrician, I received a series of gamma globulin injections to prevent my child from possibly likely birth defects, if I actually contracted the German measles this early in my pregnancy. The most feared complication of rubella is congenital rubella, which occurs when an infected pregnant woman passes the virus to her unborn child. Among other problems in birth defects, affected infants may have cataracts, heart defects, hearing impairment, and learning disabilities. The risk of transmission is highest early in the pregnancy, so I was ripe. The virus can also cause miscarriage or stillbirth. Then I had to wait and wait and wait. When my son was born, I considered myself lucky to have dodged that bullet. He was healthy, had all his parts, and everything worked. The problem is that German measles is contagious before the symptoms develop in the sick kid. So children can bring the virus home from school to their families before the breakout is discovered. And a newly pregnant mother who has not been immunized or has not had the German measles as a child is vulnerable to develop the disease, possibly resulting in a child with birth defects. Herd immunity protects the vulnerable children who cannot be immunized. But in the case of German measles, it can protect a young, vulnerable pregnant woman from passing the virus to her unborn child. And I actually have not seen that really discussed very much, about the fact that it's really scary to think that a child could go to school and be around other kids and perhaps bring the virus home and then have no symptoms at all. So mom, who's early pregnant, doesn't know that at any moment she's going to potentially have to deal with the scare of a birth defect. So in my opinion, children who have German measles should probably be kept home from school when they show symptoms, but it's really too late to prevent the prodromal contagion, that which happens before the symptoms appear. And it leaves their families at risk, it leaves their mothers at risk, and it leaves an unborn child at risk.
Stephanie Heller, please. And Jen Haywood.
My name is Stephanie Heller. I'm a pediatrician.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking for you there. I didn't realize you were sitting back there.
I'm a pediatrician, and I work in the emergency department at Sacred Heart Medical Center. While I know that vaccines are safe, effective, and save lives, I'm not here today to argue that parents who choose not to vaccinate their children should do so. I'm simply advocating that these parents be compelled to act responsibly. For every decision, there's a consequence, and the scientific community has determined through extensive research that unvaccinated children should remain out of school for a set amount of time during outbreaks of vaccine-preventable diseases in order to protect the population. Non-vaccinating parents need to comply with this standard as a consequence of their decision. No vaccine is 100% effective, but their efficacy does in effect increase as the number of vaccinated people in any given community increases. This is due to herd immunity, which can be thought of as an extra layer of protection in a vaccinated population. If all members of a community are immunized, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for a disease to breach the population. The more unvaccinated people in a community, the more vulnerable all members of that community are to illness, regardless of their immunization status. This is the rationale behind the temporary exclusion of unvaccinated children from school. And anything less than this weakens vaccine efficacy and the effect of herd immunity, and puts not only unvaccinated children at risk, but also fully immunized children. Vaccines are without a doubt the very best tool that society has to protect itself from potentially life-threatening illness. However, the success of vaccines has become their own worst enemy. Most people in this country have not witnessed the morbidity and mortality caused by infections we now routinely vaccinate against. Because of this, people feel that the risk isn't real and the danger isn't definite. But I know differently. I did my residency and fellowship training in Los Angeles, where my patient population was largely made up of immigrants who had come to the United States from the third world. And vaccines weren't part of the health care that these children received from their native countries as infants. I have taken care of kids with polio, and it's a terrible and devastating disease. I've cared for children who required limb amputation following infection with meningococcemia. I've delivered news to a number of different couples that their newborn baby who had contracted strep pneumonia meningitis would survive her infection but be deaf for the rest of her life. And I watched helplessly as a 14-year-old Mexican immigrant died of post-measles encephalitis 11 years after recovering fully from his primary measles infection, simply because he wasn't vaccinated. While I'm sharing these stories because they're compelling examples of the devastation caused by vaccine-preventable diseases, I urge you not to base your decision on emotion. This is an argument of fact, and this is an argument of science. This is an argument where only one side is overwhelmingly supported by countless volumes of research.
Okay, Jen Haywood, please. This time I'll look back to see if she's back there. Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate all your input today. That concludes our testimony from the public. And again, as I mentioned to you previously, we certainly will look at the minutes. We are given minutes to board. We'll be looking at those minutes and making sure that that you are recognized, even if it's from emails or whatever previous communication you may have sent to us. So thank you very much. Now we will go back to our usual business of the Health District. For those of you that testified, you may stay and enjoy the next hour and a half with us, or else you may go walk out the door at this time if you'd like, okay? And for the board members and administration, you may stand up for a couple minutes, because if you're like me, I'm getting terribly stiff. You have 1 minute. You go, hurry. Okay, 3 minutes. You can have 3 minutes. Torney has been awarded an annual public health, as a public health leader, an award for 2017 from the Washington State Public Health Association. So we want to congratulate you very much on that. Thank you. Now with that, I know it's been going for a long time, and a chair report has none. So I will simply say I'll turn it over to Torney for agency report, and I think Linda has a report on the legislative.
Yes, we're going to begin with Linda's report.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Linda.
In fact, did you want to kick things off?
Yeah. Sure. So I took the mantle of chairing the legislative committee, and the truth of it is that we haven't all gotten together as a whole and really hashed things out, but the legislative session's coming up, and so we came up with a process to help us get our legislative agenda from our health district, and it's really two parts. The first part is going to be looking at our legislative agenda from last year that we did approve, minus the issues that were already taken care of. So that's one handout that you have, and really the question for our board is there anything, the first question is there anything on here that you would like to take off or move to a different tier? And this is a 2-page document, and we went to the tiered system last year, and the Tier 1 system is something that's so important that we actually want primarily Linda and other staff and board members to actually do direct lobbying of our legislators on an issue.
Advocacy, not lobbying, advocacy.
In my world, that's that, but I'll take that word out, advocacy. So advocacy, and so that's one tier. The second tier is it's something that we care about and we'd like to see go forward, but there are other partners and stakeholders doing it, and we will support them, and if they deploy us to write a letter or talk to someone, we will do that kind of advocacy. And then the third tier is something that's important, we're just monitoring. So I would just like to call your attention to Tier 1. We have 2 issues on it currently: mental health, substance abuse system reform, and oral health. And if there's anyone that thinks we should take anything off of that, we'll circle back later to potentially talk about adding things. But if anyone has a pitch for that, let me know or let us know. Otherwise, I'll move to Tier 2, which is tobacco 21, making tobacco illegal unless you're at the age of 21, and safe medicine return programs. That's our Tier 2. Anyone speak against those? Seeing none, move to Tier 3, which is youth marijuana prevention account, some immunization programming, educational opportunities and learning environment, and homeless youth programs as described in the memo. And again, if anyone wants to advocate to take that off, let me know. If not, then we'll look to the potentials to add, and these, Linda has done work on these, both describing the various issues, and then at the bottom of each one, she has a staff recommendation. And she is available for any questions or concerns.
Yeah, and just to point out where these came from is, you know, we're looking at kind of what our priorities are as an agency, looking at issues that we already know are before the legislature that relate to public health, or they're issues that our partners are very interested in. So that's how they got onto this list. So.
And again, Linda has spoken to us at various of our committee meetings, but they haven't been where all of us were there, so I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that we have fully vetted and are recommending as a full committee that they go forward, because we just haven't had those kinds of discussions. But I have worked with Linda on these ones under the same criteria that she just mentioned, and she did include a one-pager on the criteria that we've used in the past. And really my question, just going through them, is 2 parts for each. One, do you think it should be added to our agenda in some tier? And if so, which tier? And Linda has her recommendations on it. But the first one has to do with youth information in the homeless management system. Right now there's a gap in that we don't have legal authority to do the type of questioning and data gathering that will help us better serve homeless youth. We have it for adults, but not for youth. I think, is that a fair one-sentence summary?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity, does the city of Spokane, is it the same way, our HMIS?
Yes, yes, and we're coordinating with them.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Are you asking for anybody to respond to you?
Yeah, so
is that what you're doing?
I guess my suggestion is, and we can do a motion at the end of it after we've gone through all of them, but as staff and at least committee chair, my recommendation is that we put it on the legislative agenda as tier 2 as recommended, and then the question is, does anyone want to speak in favor of that or against that, or a different tier, or not have on the agenda?
So these would be, we're looking at these to add to.
Right.
Yeah. That's an
And the
addition
only
to-
one that I'm recommending you don't add is the tax on sugary beverages. It's just
Okay.
not where we need to spend our time right now.
Yeah. Next one is the tax on vaping products. And I have a slight suggestion on it, but since I'm kind of leading it, I'll let anyone else weigh in if they have either, again, wanting this to be on or not on, or a different tier than Linda recommends, which is tier 1 or tier 2.
For me, with the vaping, and I honestly haven't looked into it enough, but I know it's not a safe alternative to tobacco, but I think it is better than actual tobacco. So, but I don't know honestly. Is it very health hazardous? I know I've heard some people say it isn't, and some people say it is. So, does anybody have any insight on that?
Yeah, we actually, I guess you weren't here when we did the smoking in public places work and included vaping devices under that? Okay.
Yeah.
But I can certainly, we have some information from that, but there's a lot of research that is actually on the chemicals that are in there, whether you're inhaling it directly or as secondhand vapor, and it is not just steam or water vapor. There are hazardous chemicals in there, cancer-causing chemicals, those kinds of things. So, especially around youth and the potential for youth to get addicted to the nicotine that's in there because they're not aware that a lot of these products have nicotine. And what we're seeing is youth then end up moving on to smoking.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
that's a quick synopsis. Yeah.
And Linda really have a good report on that. So if you need more information, I'm sure she'll be more than willing to help you with that.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Do we know what the cost of a vape pen is?
It varies significantly. Because you can get ones that are just single use, or you can get ones that are, rechargeable and multi-use, and so there's a whole range of prices.
And Karen, yeah, it's actually quite interesting if you're ever to find yourself in a vape shop, as I have on a couple of occasions. I mean, you can buy, as Linda said, the single use, you can go to Quick Mart and buy a single use for a couple bucks. But the ones in the vape shops, I mean, they can range up to 100 plus. I mean, very extravagant. I mean, lots of bells and whistles. And, it's fascinating to see how it's evolved. I mean, whereas, it used to be that they were very obviously looked like an e-cig. Now, as I said, they're disguised. They look like a variety of different products. You wouldn't necessarily know them to be what they are.
Yeah.
They've also gotten a way to, as I said, they've done some interesting little gimmicks on them to, again, I was flying home the other day, as a matter of fact, and somebody, unbeknownst to the attendants, was vaping in the airplane.
Wow.
Yep.
Because nobody was aware that what he was using was actually an e-cig.
Yeah, happens quite a bit. One of just to give you a little background of what the discussion has been at the legislature, is really kind of a struggle of where to set the tax. There are some who want it to be on par with tobacco. There are those that say, no, there's at least some evidence that some people are using these to quit smoking and maybe they aren't quite as harmful, so we don't want to tax them as much. So that's been kind of the discussion at the legislature. Yeah, so they're still debating on where they're going to settle in. So we really haven't gotten into numbers in terms of what is the tax we would support. We just feel it is a measure for a couple of things. Youth prevention, increasing the cost to help keep them out of the hands of youth. Also, in looking where the revenue source would go, Tobacco 21 is going to have a revenue hit. They're going to lose revenue by raising if they raise the legal age to purchase tobacco, because they're going to lose part of the market, right, 18 to 21. There is some talk that if we do a vaping tax, some of that money could go to cover the lost revenue from the Tobacco 21, at least for a certain period of time. There's also talk that the tax on vaping products could come to public health and help with youth tobacco, vaping, and marijuana prevention.
Sorry. So I just have a kind of a clarification question for me. As these things move, as you look to move them into the tiers, do you prioritize the items within the tiers just because it seems like a lot of items?
We've kind of looked at that a little bit, and I think since last year was the first time we put it in tiers, the previous practice was just kind of list them in an order of priority. So we kind of did that a little bit last year, but I don't know that anybody was getting overly picky as to, within each tier, where do we want them?
Okay.
But it's certainly something we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask, have there been studies done to show if people can effectively use the vaping products to quit smoking?
At this point, it's only anecdotal. There has been attempts at research, and the research is showing that it's not working.
Okay.
A lot of people continue to actually use both.
Any demographic data you have as far as vaping products as well? Because I know that's there was actually an article that was out within the last couple of weeks that kind of showed taxes on the sugary beverage. The effort was to make people drink less, but instead people are still drinking the same amount, and it's just a tax on the poor. Is sort of an angle. Do we run the risk of that with vaping products? Do we have any demographic data on who is using the vape products?
I'm not seeing any particular demographic, certainly not one heavily weighted on an equity issue that we would really be concerned about, similar to a sugary beverage tax.
So do we know that, or are we just making that assumption? I mean, do we run the risk
I can
on
certainly
something
do a
like
double
this?
check on the data, but I have not seen anything that's really, being highlighted for me.
Okay.
So I can check on it.
And my comment was just, I think we should have it on our list, but I think it should be tier 3, which is we're just monitoring it. We're not really advancing it but for those kinds of reasons. It's still a little hazy to me what they're going to propose. It's something that's important, and I'm not sure the idea that we have to backfill the tobacco revenue. I don't know. So that's my proposal, is that by putting it in tier 3, we're not saying we're in favor of it or against it. We're just saying this is an important thing, we want to study it more. Then we want Linda to report back how that's going. So that's my proposal on that one. So
I'd support that.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what else do you recommend we do at the time?
Well, we have some more. So my proposal is we're going through and kind of taking people's temperature on, do we want to add it to the list? And if so, which tier? So the homeless people seemed fine with tax vaping, fine, but tier 3 instead of supporting it. And then there's just a couple more to go through. The next one is the tax on model toxics. Well, no, it's the tax on toxics, but it's MOCTA. And I think, again, the really short on that is that as oil prices have fallen, the amount of money that's available from that tax, which is based on price instead of volume, is less available for cities and counties to do stormwater projects, essentially, is how it shows up. And Linda's recommendation is that it go in at tier 2 or 3. And again, the difference between that is tier 3 is we're just monitoring it. Tier 2 is we're actually supporting some changes, but aren't taking the lead on it.
So tier 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd say 3.
3.
3,
Yep.
okay.
And then I'm less familiar with the lead-based paint certification fees. Linda has some language on it. Again, she's recommending tier 2 or tier 3. Okay.
Okay.
And then tax on sugary beverages, Linda's recommendation is not to have it on the list. So I would bring a motion that we take the following from the proposed, which is the youth information and homeless as a tier 1, tax on vaping products, the MOCTA tax, and lead-based tax as tier 2. And add
tier 3.
Tier 3,
Tier
sorry.
3.
Tier 3, sorry. I meant
Okay.
tier 3.
Okay.
Not trying to
sneak
sneak one
something
by
in
you, Sam.
Okay.
As tier 3.
Do I hear a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay.
And is everybody okay with moving forward with the items that were on last year's agenda and keeping
Do you
those?
need a
Do you want to
motion to
keep
that
them in the
end?
tiers that they are?
Well,
vote on that other one, I think, before we.
Okay.
All right, well, let me just change my motion slightly to,
Okay.
I move that we, for the 2018 legislative agenda, we include the issues as put forward by Ms. Graham in the two-pager, and then add one issue to Tier 1, youth homeless information, and 3 issues to Tier 3, tax on vaping products, model toxics, and lead-based paint certification fees.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Thank you, passed. Okay.
Okay, so I will bring that forward to you in December for a final vote on a resolution with those. One other item in your packet was information on the Tobacco 21 campaign. Again, this is raising the minimum age to sell tobacco. Last year, I want to acknowledge the fact that this is, again, this year, a major push for public health and our partners throughout the state. So we work with, with SOLFO, DOH. This is also a DOH and Attorney General request legislation. We're working with public health, Roundtable, and lots of other entities, Heart and Lung Association, all of those. So there's going to be a big push on this again this year. We've gotten some good traction, so we're hoping to get this through. One of the things that we did last year as a Board of Health was to pass a resolution. In your packet is a draft resolution again this year. It's the same as last year with one exception. It includes a clause calling on other jurisdictions in the Spokane area to pass similar resolutions. Those jurisdictions would be such as those that you all represent. It could also be organizations related to public health or, lung cancer, those kinds of things, really calling on others in the community to do the same thing. So I don't know if you want to do any discussion here. The idea is to have the final resolution to you in December for vote. But if you want to have any discussion now, that's up to you. I guess that's the end of comments on that one. So.
Do you want to have further discussion? Do you want to wait until December to discuss it? Okay.
So for me, I've struggled with this since I saw it last year. I agree with the science behind it, that the longer people wait to start, the better off. But where my issue lies is this two-tier adulthood that we keep pushing more and more. At 18 years old, you can sign up and be in the military or even be a police officer for that matter, and you can go and be shot or shoot somebody, but you can't have a beer. And you can now not have a cigarette or chew. While they may be harmful to you, I'm not going to dispute that. I just have a real hard time with this knowing what's best for people, and so we're going to make that decision for them. So while I wholeheartedly agree with this, and I would love to see the education program continue on, I can't support something where I continue to tell people I know how to live their life better than they do. So I'd be voting no on this one.
Any further discussion? Karen?
Okay. That's right.
There you go, you're on. No. What? There you go.
I agree. I look at this.
There you go.
I look at this and I get it, and in my heart, I understand it, but in my head, I just, you can vote when you're 18. Some of the examples that Councilmember Munch just said, I'm struggling with this one. I don't want kids to smoke, period, but I just struggle that at 18, they're able to do other things, and to set that at 21, it makes me feel like the big bad mom with the stick, and it just doesn't feel right to me. I don't think I could support this.
Any other discussion?
Now I'm off. Am I still on?
Well, then, what would you say that we continue then December the 3rd?
Yeah, we can have final vote on that resolution in December. Yeah. No.
Thank you very much. Let's go to consent agenda, because I know
We
people are...
have Dr. Bob, and then I'll do a brief piece.
I'll be really brief.
We got a vote.
Let's get this consent agenda over first.
Oh,
We need a
gotcha.
need a vote, then we can come back to the office.
That's terrific.
You want to walk out of it. And Susan would be one of them, I know that.
Actually going to supervise vaccination clinics at my school. As timely as that might be.
So, do I have a motion to accept the meeting minutes of September 28, 2017, and vouchers September 1 through 30, 2017?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those against? Thank you. Now, Dr. Lutz, would you like to, Dr. McFarney, who's first? You or Dr. Lutz?
Well, actually, in sitting here speaking with Bob, I don't think there is anything that either of us has that's urgent for today. Would prefer to have Mike come and do his budget history piece, and you have sat here for a long board meeting, and being respectful of that, we can bring back issues next month.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
And with that in mind, Mr. Riley, let's give it a go.
I canceled once. I canceled at 8 times. I'll make it very brief. There was a longer version, but I'm going to go to the shorter version for a couple reasons. I did want to present today because I knew we have some new board members. So what I was presenting today was more about our history of how our revenues and those come in. So I'll go through a quick version of that. And our process here at the Health District has changed. This year we've actually used a different Profix software that's given us a better reporting and better budgeting tool in order for us to use our Profix software. What that has entailed is for staff, including the managers and the director and finance and everybody, having to learn a new tool and set up new templates in order to do this budgeting tool. So it sort of pushed us behind a bit. So normally at this meeting, I'm coming in October and passing our budget and all ready to go. One, because that we're just not quite there yet. Haven't had a chance to meet with the final meeting with the Budget and Finance Committee, which is going to go on next week and the week after. I'll split time with both committees. And then we'll go over that. And so what I was going to do is check in with them, sort of show them what I was going to present today, in case you want to go and I know people are going to be leaving anyway, and I'll go over with them what they want me to present at next month's meeting. When I bring the 2018 budget, I can also at least send out or present next month sort of what all comes into our health district as far as revenues and history of that. So this was sort of an end of year 16. How we finished. We finished great. We stayed in for the first time ever, we went over $25 million in expenses. We were pretty much between 20 and 25 million for 11 straight years. But in 2016, we went over the 25 million mark. And now as we move into 17, we're up at about more 27 million. And as I bring the proposed budget to you, we're probably going to be at 29 or 30 million as far as expenses go, with new revenues coming in. So there's new revenues coming in. And so another reason why we're sort of delaying the budget is we have changes happening. All of a sudden these revenue changes have been coming in. When we started the new October federal grants that are proposed to come in, there's some are coming in less and some are coming in more, and we've also got granted 2 or 3 other new grants. So there's actually some new grant money coming in that we're proposing. So that's the short version of the proposal. So if you have any questions on the budget, on things, I can send it out to you or have Ann send it out and take a look, and we can go over, unless Tony wants me to proceed more in detail.
Any questions regarding Mike? Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I? Excuse me, I should have made 2 very brief announcements. One is to let you know that we have, Mark Springer and I have been invited to attend the Superintendent District ESD 101 Superintendent meeting tomorrow. Bob will be on the phone. It's a by invitation thing. We have not done these before, but I understand we sort of wait until they call us in, they hear our little 20 minutes that we have, and then we'll be gone. But we will be doing that tomorrow. And then just a reminder that the Great American Smokeout Challenge is on November 16th. And our health district has been graciously supported by David's Pizza. So anybody who is quitting smoking and shows up there gets a slice of pizza that night.